All right, so we're live. Looks like it started up. Sometimes I have to do it twice. I want to make sure for anybody that's not here that it's captured because I wanted to point out, obviously, we didn't have class on Thursday because they canceled school, which put us behind. We were in the middle of the chapter. I normally get through marketing research, so we can't. I mean, I was in the middle of talking about the chapter on ethics, and so we couldn't possibly get that. I'm probably not going to get through marketing research. So the first exam will not cover the chapter on marketing research, but for those of you that didn't find it, there were a number of questions. You have to scroll down and click for the sample exams from previous semesters, click load more content, and then you'll find that there are an exam from the spring of 2017, and there's one that doesn't have the key. The spring of 2017 has the key. There's one that I lost the key to. Which one is that? Is it fall? It's this one that says marketing. No, that's it. Fall exam one, principles. That one doesn't have a key. The way I would approach the exams is to try to work through the exams first before going to the keys. In subsequent ones, I have all of the keys for them on there. But to work through it and figure out why the answer is the way it is. Now, the questions are phrased in such a way on these exams because this is a 3,000 level course. It's a junior level course, but it's not just about sort of identifying terms, but actually being able to apply them. And that sort of makes sense if you think about this, because at this level, what you are doing is you are going to go, most of you will go into business. And you have to have some understanding of the way sort of all of this comes together, even if you're not a marketing major. If you're going to go into business, marketing is a core tenet. It's the only fully integrated function of the firm. And so you're going to have to understand how marketing works in order for the business to succeed. Even if you're an accountant and you're not, you're in a big corporation, you're still going to have to understand something about marketing. And so how that impacts the core discipline, as opposed to say something like one of those general education courses that you take at the beginning of your academic career, which would be 1,000 and 2,000 level courses like I used to teach when I was a political scientist before I became a marketer. I used to teach American national government, and that's a 1,000 level course. Everybody has to take 1113 American national government. You all took that. Most students hate it. I don't understand why they hate it, but the world around you, to make you sort of a Renaissance individual and make you aware that government in the United States consists of 3 distinct and unique branches. That's different than other countries where they don't necessarily have distinction between their branches. For example, in the United Kingdom, Parliament, the Prime Minister, who is the head of government, is also a member of the House of Commons. And so they don't have this distinction between the legislative and judicial, or the legislative and the executive branches. And that's important because it functions differently than we do. And so that's the kind of thing we wanted you to sort of have an appreciation for in that level course. But, you're not going to have to know deep detail and substance of, American political systems when you get out in the real world. You're not going to think about it. You're going to sort of understand. You go vote. Today's a voting day if you didn't see the polling places up. But in business, that's not the case. You are going to have to use these skills, and so it's more important. So the exams are tailored to not just be the identification of terms from the textbook or concepts that we talked about in class, but the application. And so a lot of the questions are designed such that there is a best answer. And students often get to the first answer, and that sounds good, and they circle that answer, and then they go on. So I'll give you an example. If I said something like, which of the following statements concerning marketing is true? And the first answer says, marketing is a pervasive social activity. Well, from the fact that I talked about this in class, that's the definition that I add, or that's the part of it that I add to the definition of marketing, that it's a pervasive social activity. So you check that answer, you think you're good to go, and you move on, and you read the next answer. The next answer, marketing is a pervasive social activity. It's the only fully integrated function of the firm. Well, that's something I say a lot. Marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. Marketing seeks to create value among all aspects of the firm. Marketing is the only one that has to work with all of the other departments in the firm and with the company's external constituencies or customers. So the second answer says marketing is pervasive social activity and it's the only fully integrated function of the firm. Well, that answer is better than the first one, isn't it? You get to the third answer. Marketing is a pervasive social activity. It's the only fully integrated function of the firm, and it's the only aspect of the firm that deals with external. So do you see how there's a better choice there? What's the best one now? Now the best one is C. And then maybe D says, unless you have an advanced degree in marketing, you'll never know anything about it. Well, if it's a pervasive social activity, you already know something about it. That's. I asked you what makes this class different. At the beginning, you guys come up with a lot of different things. What I think makes this class different is that the minute you walked into this classroom, you knew something about marketing, right? So you could ignore D. And then E says, marketing is not. So you've got two distractors, and you've got three that are all technically correct, and you have to ascertain which is the most complete. That's the way these exams are written. So it's important that you think about this, that you read each question carefully, and that you think about how it, not just the definition of marketing applies, or not just the definition of marketing, but how it actually applies to real world concrete stuff. You will need a form 882E for the first exam. That's the one that has 50 questions or 50 answer slots on one side and 50 on the back. We'll only have 25. The exams I've dropped down from 50. I used to give 50 question exams. People ran out of time. It didn't seem to make any difference in the scoring. You got exhausted, and so I do 25 question exams now. Easy, breezy, beautiful. They are fair and balanced, just like Fox News, I can tell you that. Because I take every single one of them before I give them to you, and I make 100. So it should be, absolutely possible. It should be that. So that's, we'll have the first exam on Thursday. It will not cover, for those of you who are a little bit late, it will not cover research because we won't have time to get through research today. If you forget your green Scantron, the Department of Marketing sells them. I will bring them to class. They're 50 cents a piece if you need a green Scantron. So you have to have a green Scantron. I will sell them to you. If you don't have 50 cents, I guess your SOL will have to beat you with a wet mule, or I don't know. I guess I'll let you bring it to me next time. But we sell them for 50 cents. We're trying to pay for a new building. We're building that new College of Business building, one green Scantron at a time. So, any questions about the exam? All right. So we started talking about where we left off, actually, talking about subjectivism. Subjectivism is this idea that the self is all one. No, there's no objective truths. It rejects what we call a priori knowledge. And I think I have that up there. A priori knowledge as opposed to a posteriori is knowledge that can be derived from the rational mind without reference to experience. So if I asked you, for example, if I gave you this example and said you have a rectilinear, I'm not a very good artist. No, you didn't think you're going to have math here. A rectilinear triangle, and this side is 3, and this side is 4, a rectilinear right angle triangle. What's the third side have to be? What? 5. Where do we get that? A squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? The Pythagorean theorem. Now, how did Pythagoras come up with this theory, this theorem? Did he run around drawing rectilinear triangles in the dirt in ancient Greece? No. He could see that. You can see this. You can know it with the mind's eye. That's a priori. Now, he didn't go around, and it works out really well if you've got a 3, 4, 5 triangle, right? If you have other numbers, it's more complex. Now, this theory and this formula, right angle triangles, are useful aren't they? In construction, this theory is useful in the real world. We can find all kinds of right-angled triangles in here, in buildings, things like that. So this is something you can know a priori. Well, subjectivists say there is none of this. There's no a priori truths. There's nothing that you can know a priori, particularly not when it comes to things like ethics. Because as we said last time, if we start talking about things that are really hard questions, like should we be allowed to manufacture and sell and distribute drugs like RU486, which is called the morning after pill, people start to have different opinions about this. And they become very animated by it. So subjectivists say, it's just all a matter of opinion. We can't really have that. And I put up here the Griswold versus Connecticut case, because that's the case that said you could manufacture contraceptive devices. And Griswold in 1975 is the progeny of Roe versus Wade, which allows for the marketing of abortion services, which is highly controversial. Right? And so if we start asking people about these things, we start seeing, well, maybe this does seem to be true. We can't really all agree. We're not going to get 100% unanimity on these really hard things. When we're dealing with, realities of the world like rectilinear triangles, although does a rectilinear triangle actually occur in nature anywhere? Or is it something that we construct so that we can use it? It's useful. Construction, building grades, things like that. Are we, if we have these things that we can know pure logically, but for subjectivists, they would say, this is really truths about things that are made up. They're constructs that we make up. Do we see rectilinear? Well, you can kind of see them, but, not really. I mean, we use them in building, but it doesn't exist in nature anywhere. And so they would say this is just a construct that we've made up that we're agreeing to. And this goes back to what is this? Is this a desk? Well, what's the problem with subjectivism? If we accepted subjectivism as true, we could never say things like murder is wrong. And I would submit to you, you don't have to experience murder to know that it's wrong. A priori. You don't have to experience it to know that people cling to life, even in the most abhorrent of circumstances. Voltaire talks about this in a book called Candide. Candide is not really a novel, though it pretends to be one. It's a series of unfortunate events that happens to Candide as he tries to pursue his love, which is Cunegonde, who's the daughter of a baron in the land of Westphalia, where Candide lives. He comes upon her and he experiences carnal lust, and he gets kicked out very powerfully by the German baron Thunder Cantrunks out of Westphalia. And he spends the rest of the book trying to find Candide. And they go through a series of these really horrific things, and they come across an old woman. And she says, they're telling their stories, and she says, you wouldn't speak so, because he says, well, certainly I've had the worst life. And she said, you wouldn't speak so if you know what happened to me. I didn't always look like this. My nose didn't always touch my chin. I wasn't always fat. I was the daughter of a pope. Needless to say, popes aren't supposed to have daughters, but apparently she was supposed to be married to a prince, and he ships her off to be married to the prince, and along the way she gets caught up by a bunch of pirates who kidnap her and hold her for ransom. And then as they're starving to death, they cut off one of her butt cheeks and eat it. So she lives this miserable life, and she says, the most horrible thing is that as much as my life became wretched and old, I was sold into slavery from one person to another, I went on loving life. Perhaps it's our most fatal flaw to constantly cling to something that we should probably throw off. So I don't think you have to experience murder to know that it's probably wrong. And the problem with subjectivism is that if we look at hard proofs in math, there are disagreements. So they hold it to too high of a standard. The second problem is that we could never form a society. If we said everybody can do what they want, we couldn't have any kind of rational society. I think you can figure out that you probably don't want somebody to walk up and beat you over the head. We couldn't have marketing or society or anything like that if I could walk around and just take what I wanted from you because I was the larger person, right? The third problem with subjectivism is it doesn't allow us to have universal results when we start judging people. So it's emotive. It's not based on logic. It's based on just my self-interest, and it doesn't allow us to form society. So I think we can reject it, but it does seem intuitively appealing because we see that there are these tendencies to think that we'll never get agreement when we start talking about really hard things. Like, should we manufacture this product? Should we allow companies to try out their drugs? If you're dying of a horrible disease, do we just let companies experiment on you? Sign up. May kill you. We generally don't do that. Do we use prisoners to try it? Well, we don't do that either, right? There were times when they did that. So a second challenge to ethics comes in the form of cultural relativism. This is the one that is particularly used by business. It again says there are no a priori truths, but it doesn't say that they are embedded in the individual. Rather, they're embedded within the culture or the context in which you grow up. So they're culturally specific. And a lot of business people love this because we have something in the United States, as far as marketers are concerned, called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act says that it's illegal to do things like engage in bribery in other places. And a lot of businesses say that hampers us. In other countries, it's sort of expected that if you want to do business there, you engage in bribing the officials. If you want to get permits to build in China, your company, you may have to bribe somebody, and you're not allowed to do that. And so cultural relativists say, look, that's culturally specific. Although we don't allow you to do that in the United States, it's considered a crime. In other places, they sort of, they expect it. And so we should respect their cultures. Now, why is this one particularly attractive to students? Because we're told as Americans and as a multicultural society that we should respect other cultures, and you should. But that doesn't mean there's a difference between respecting other cultures and appreciating diversity and allowing for the tolerance of abhorrent things. If we took cultural relativism to its extreme, we could never say things like Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler was a priori wrong, and we just do. Or Russia under Stalin was wrong. Stalin killed more of his own people, confiscated their land, their property, and we couldn't say that's, if we took cultural relativism to its extremes, we couldn't say that. So again, there are problems with this, but it's appealing. Because if you look at these things, you do see lots of differences out there in the world. I'm told, I don't know this, I'm not a cultural anthropologist, but I am told by some of my friends that are, that among the native populations in North America in the higher latitudes, so we generally call those people Eskimos and Inuits in Canada and Alaska, that they were nomadic people. How did they live? Does anything grow really well in Alaska or northern Canada? No, doesn't. Although, by the way, Canada is now a net exporter of bell peppers and tomatoes. We import more tomatoes from Canada now than we do from Mexico. They grow them in these huge greenhouses. They've got all this land up there, no population. And if you put them in a greenhouse, they grow just fine. So they grow a lot of tomatoes in hothouses in Canada now. But before that, they didn't have that. So how did people who lived up there live? What did they do to eat? What? Import? No, before that, before there was importing. How did the native populations up there live? What did they do? They hunted. They were hunters. What did they hunt? What'd you guess? Well, okay, they fish. It's the difference between fishing and hunting, although I guess technically, it is still going after something. They what? Okay, there were bears. They did bears. There are some elk. What do they have a lot of in Canada and Alaska? What? They have moose. They do have moose. They hunted those. They also have the things that Santa Claus uses to bring up reindeer. They hunted reindeer. They hunted seal. So they're a nomadic people, and they move from place to place as they need to follow those animals that they're trying to herd. When you get too old to keep up with the tribe, I'm told, I don't know if this is true, but I'm told by my friends who are cultural anthropologists, that when you get too old to keep up, they put you out on the ice floe. Wave goodbye. And you starve to death or freeze to death and die. See ya, Grandma. Been nice knowing you. Sorry, gotta chase that reindeer. Those of us who live here in Oklahoma think, you put Grandma out on the ice floe? That seems abhorrent. No, we treat them so much better. We put them in these wonderful places where they get bed sores and smells and reeks of urine. And maybe they're abused. And there's all kinds of attorneys out there now that are marketing. Has your loved one suffered a fall in a nursing home? Call Dan Davis on the hurt line. These are cultural differences. And so we are attracted to this, but if we accept that again, if we took it to its logical extreme, if we made an argument ad absurdum, we couldn't say, again, that Nazi Germany was wrong. That's just their culture. Well, no, that's not going to be okay. All right? That's not going to be okay. And in the United States, we have things like the Foreign Practices Act, which prevents you from doing things like that. Now, the third one doesn't sound right, but it actually is more difficult to deal with than the other two. I think you can see how the other two, yeah, they sound right. If I ask you about things like the marketing of abortion services, we probably all have lots of different opinions in here. We probably, it goes from one extreme to the next. I don't really want to get into those debates. But this one doesn't seem right. This one is what we call a deterministic philosophy. Again, based on solipsism, the self is all one knows. And it says that as a result of either nature or nurture or a combination of the two, we can't really help but do the things that we do. We react to stimuli in very predictable ways. And there's an example in marketing of this. A guy picks up on this. His name is Martin Lindstrom, and he writes a book called Biology. And it's B-U-Y-O-L-O-G-Y, not biology. And it's the science of why we buy. And he says we can't help ourselves. He's a big marketer, an actual practitioner. He doesn't have a PhD in marketing. And they do all of these experiments on people. Now, this doesn't sound right. Because what psychological egoism says is you lack free will. You think you have it, but you don't. My friends who are in biology, not in biology, but in the actual department of biology, the study of life sciences, are going to tell you things like, they'll be a little bit horrified at my simplification of this, but they study living things. And so among mammals and primates in particular, and the human primate, the Homo sapien, what makes a male different from a female genetically? What are females genetically?
You mean a chromosome?
Yeah. Females are what? What are females? They're XX, and males are XY. All right. So if you have a Y chromosome, I want you to raise your hand. Everybody with a Y chromosome, raise your hand. Why did you raise your hand? For those of you that have Y chromosomes, why did you raise your hand?
Because he said if you had a Y chromosome,
Didn't I overcome your free will? You think you have free will, but you raised your hand for a variety of reasons. Most of which in this example are probably nurture induced. You're told from an early age, do what the teacher says. Because not here in college in big people school, but in little people school, they can do draconian things to you if you don't do what the teacher says. When I was growing up in Oklahoma, they could still use corporal punishment in the school system, which I found morally offensive, by the way. But they would take kids out in the hallway with a paddle, and if you didn't do what the teacher said, they, have you bend over and whack. It just offended my sense of justice. I want you to know. And my mother would never sign the form, that I could be paddled. She just wouldn't do it. Thankfully, we've become more humane and they no longer do that, I don't think. Anybody grow up in a school where they did that? Really? They still spanked you in school?
It is a private school.
Well, how horrific for you. I apologize for your, but they could do that. I can't do that in here. I would, that's called assault and battery if I do that. Now, I could do other draconian things, but you're told from a very early age, do what the teacher says. You also raised your hand because you probably weren't thinking about it too much, or because if you have a Y chromosome and you didn't raise your hand, the guy next to you might look at you and, dude, questioning? Don't know? Right? I mean, there's social pressure. So psychological egoists would say we don't really have free will. Can you will yourself to not want something? Let's think about that. Can you will yourself, what is it that you all, I love Allen Edmonds shoes. Love them. Have currently 8 pairs of Allen Edmonds shoes. Can you will yourself to not want the Allen Edmonds shoes?
Yeah.
No, I don't think you can.
Buddhist monks.
What?
Monks.
You want monks?
Now, like you said, you will yourself not to want something.
Yeah.
It's like Buddhist monks, how they live. They may control what they want and what they don't want.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? I may see a pair of Allen Edmonds shoes that I want, and I don't buy it. And you would say that's a product of free will, based on this Buddhist monk theory, right? But for a determinist, what they would say is, no, you didn't. You just want something more than you want the Allen Edmonds shoes. So the Buddhist monk who is the ascetic, who follows in the way of the Buddha, who denies, who sits there under the lotus tree, legs crossed in meditation, is just wanting that more than he wants all of the trappings of life. But he didn't will himself to want that. Did he? You think he did? He willed himself to want that. Can you really will yourself to not want something? You can just wean yourself off of it. But the psychological egoist would say you just want to be clean and sober more. You still want the drugs. And I will tell you that people who are in recovery will tell you this. You never get over They will tell you this, that you never get over that desire. Well, what's wrong with this? Well, psychological egoism relies on a logical fallacy called equivocation. It conflates our motives with our emotions. So, for example, the psychological egoist would say, well, people like Mother Teresa, these Buddhist monks that sit in the lotus position and achieve nirvana, just want that more, right? But the fact that they want that doesn't necessarily mean, or the fact that they feel good about that, doesn't mean that that's the motivation for doing it. It also doesn't tell us what to do when people are highly conflicted. And we do see examples of altruism all the time. People give up things, they sacrifice for their children. And they may be conflicted in those sacrifices. If you have more than one kid, you may have to make decisions and sacrifices and choose between them. And they're enormously conflicted on those. So what do you do when you have those kinds of conflicts? So psychological egoism relies on this logical fallacy of equivocation, where it equates motives with the feelings that follow from the reasons that we do certain things. All three of these have problems. And the thing that makes them not valid ethical theories are that their motive, they allow me to say I'm special, I'm unique, or my group is special, my group is unique. They're not based on logical analysis of a situation, and they allow for exceptionalism. So you can't develop codes of conduct that we can apply universally to everybody in all places at all times, because they allow you to say, no, but I'm special, my group is special, and those are the three problems. So what is a valid ethical theory? Well, a valid ethical theory would be the opposite of those three things. It would be something that's based on reason. It's not emotive because it's based on reason, and it doesn't allow for exceptions. Doesn't allow for exceptionalism. Now, that's not to say that the valid ethical theories don't have problems. It's just that they are not fatally flawed problems. They don't start out with these three, but there are problems, and you'll see with all of the valid ethical theories, there are some problems with them that we can come up with. But they're at least based on reason. They're not going to allow you to say, I'm special, my group is special. You're going to have to apply the analysis to everybody that you come in contact with, and they don't allow, therefore, for exceptionalism. You can't say, my country, my group, my society, my friends are all better than everybody else, and we should be able to get away with things that others can't get away with. So the valid ethical theories trace their roots all the way back to Socrates in the Western ethical tradition. Socrates' most famous student was Plato. He followed Socrates around, and he develops these ideas and writes them down. Socrates never wrote anything down. He would never get tenure at a college professor because he just walked around and he was a gadfly, talked a lot. Plato wrote it down. And in Republic, which is the most fully worked out of the Platonic dialogues, we get the entire system of philosophy that answers these three questions of the question of knowledge, conduct, and governance. And ultimately in Republic, what you get is you can tease out the foundations, the philosophical foundations for communism in Republic. You can get that there. Right? In my marketing ethics class, we talk a lot more about Republic, but I won't go into great depths there. The one that most students are in this class, the one that most students and business students like is a version. It is in the patrimony of the Socratic method that comes down and it forms the basis of utilitarianism. Now, utilitarianism is often reduced to the saying, the ends justify the means. And in response to that, in sort of a Hegelian dialectic where we have a thesis and an antithesis, the antithesis of utilitarianism is rational absolutism or deontological ethics. takes a couple of forms. And then finally, there's virtue, which we get from Aristotelian logic and Aristotle's two greatest works, the Nicomachean Ethics and the Eudemian Ethics. So what is teleological ethics or utilitarianism? This is called the greatest happiness principle. And this is the reason that business students like it. Because in the United States, our economic capitalist system, Adam Smith, the free hand of the economy, is utilitarian. Smith and capitalism and the idea of the efficient market hypothesis are in the patrimony of the philosophical utilitarians. What does that mean? Well, what does Smith say? You should sell, if I can get $1,000 for this iPhone, which that's what they're going for now, right? I don't have the newest version. This was new when I got it. It was the latest version. Back in the day, 2 years ago. That's ancient history now. If I get $1,000 for the iPhone, I should be able to sell my iPhone for that. Because what's going to happen? People who value the iPhone are going to be willing to pay more, and they're going to put it to higher and better uses than those that are not willing to pay for it. So I should, it's efficient. You're not willing to pay for $1,000 for an iPhone, you could get a sucky what? I don't know. Samsung. Galaxy. Some inferior communist product. You'll find I have many, many, many strongly held opinions about products in this class. You may disagree with me, it won't affect your grade, but I will have many strongly held opinions. I don't love Apple, but I do think their phone is one of the better products that they manufacture. I'm pretty committed to the Apple one. Not to their notebooks or anything else, but I am committed to the Apple iPhone. You're shaking your head. You can either agree with me or you can be wrong. I mean, it's one or two choices. It's a binary choice here. It's like Coke and Pepsi. Coke is all American. Pepsi is the tool of the devil. There are many tools of the devil. Trust me, the devil has many tools. Pepsi is one of them. Starbucks. I hate Starbucks. Starbucks should be illegal. Tool of the devil. Right? So the greatest happiness. So economists talk about the maximization of utility in terms of economics. What does that mean, the maximization of utility? Well, again, if you want to get a worthless degree, get a degree in economics. They rename stuff that we all understand intuitively with fancy terms like maximize your utility. What does that mean? Well, that means that you want to get the most bang for your buck. Right? That's what it is. That's what maximization of utility boils down to, is get the most bang for your buck. I want to stretch my dollar as far as I can. So if I can get this iPhone from some dealer for less than $1,000 because they're willing to, I'm willing to sign a contract or whatever and negotiate, that's what I should do. I should stretch it as far as I can. I should use it in the most efficient way that benefits me. Well, instead of the maximization of economic utility in terms of ethics, what we're going to do, according to Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, is we're going to maximize happiness. We're going to maximize happiness for everybody. Now, this sounds good, right? Now, what makes this not an invalid theory? The maximization of happiness, if you follow the calculus, is absolutely rational. It doesn't allow you to say maximize whose happiness? My happiness, or your happiness, or my group's happiness. You have to maximize overall happiness, right? Not for me individually, or you, but overall. It comes in two forms. The purest form is act utility. So in every situation, I have to analyze. So for example, this morning when I got up and we didn't have a class on Thursday, I had to analyze, what's going to make the most overall happiness with regard to getting this knowledge that you need to go forth and prosper in the world to you and not create the most disruption. Now, I've got the syllabus that said we were supposed to have an exam today. I could have walked in with an exam that said it's on the syllabus. I'm just doing what I said. But would that have created, and I gave you an exam that covers both marketing ethics and marketing research, and would that make you all overall happy? Well, we'll get to that. You're shaking your head no. Maybe it would. Failure builds character. It does. Getting the crap kicked out of you, that's a character building experience. So maybe I should have given you the exam because that's what's in the syllabus. Maybe it would increase, maybe you weren't happy today, but in the end, you'll learn to overcome adversity. You'll be a stronger person for it. Another form is called rule utility, which tries to deal with some of the problems with act utility by coming up with in the aggregate. So act utilitarianism says in every instance I have to follow, what I think is going to be the most maximization of utility for everybody or the most maximization of happiness. Rule utility says, look, we can't really do that. We can't leave individuals to do this. We have to do it in the aggregate. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose I know as a business person that I have this drug and there are 10 people over here and I can give the drug to them, or I can give the drug to 3 people over here. But I don't have enough for everybody. I've got 2 groups and I can't get into both places because there's a time limit on the drug's expiration. I can only get into one place. I can either say 10 people or 3. What should I do? Most people say the 10, right? You save 10 you sacrifice 3 to save 10. Right? Well, then you have to start calculating the value of a human life, and that seems kind of creepy, doesn't it? And so rule utility says, look, maybe we shouldn't in the individual let individuals come up with this. We should in the aggregate come up with rules that maybe produce the overall greatest happiness. I'll give you an example. This deals with marketing. I bet you didn't know that a lot of your chocolate, we're coming up on Easter. It's the largest chocolate buying day in the world. In the United States, the largest chocolate buying day is actually not Easter, it's what? No, it's Halloween. It's Halloween. But we're coming up on Valentine's Day and Easter. And so Easter is the largest worldwide chocolate buying day. Why is that historically? Because you come off of, why is Easter a big chocolate buying day? Historically, what was Easter? It was the breaking of the what? If you're Catholic, you give up stuff for Lent. It's the end of the Lenten season, right? So
Part of CNN's Freedom Project is a commitment to helping end modern-day slavery. The bitter truth behind the chocolate in your Easter basket. It is one of the lead stories on CNN's Autocracy website. It's managing editor, Kat Kinsman. She's joining us from New York. So, first of all, it's a lot of people would not suspect that this is happening, that this is taking place. If you're buying chocolate, how do you know whether or not it's actually contributing to child slavery, like the little boy we saw there? Well, this is really disturbing and new information to a lot of people, and especially since we're coming up upon Easter, which worldwide is the biggest chocolate buying time of the year. We thought we would come up with a list of tips that people can look at to help guide them towards slavery-free chocolate. The first one would be to go organic. There's very little chance that any organic chocolate that you're going to buy is going to be made with slave labor. The trees are generally on the Ivory Coast 25 years old and not grown under organic practices, and they're not planting new ones. So that's a really great route to go. You should start to consider the origin of where your chocolate is coming from. And if you're looking, and because of the Harkin-Engel Act, it's a little bit easier to find out the origins of the cocoa that is used in your chocolate. So while it might be coming from Asia or from a few other places, it might not be perfect, but it's better than chocolate you're going to find coming from the Ivory Coast. Now, another thing you can do is to look at the labels. ethically sourced chocolate is generally going to have a stamp on it that says that it's either Rainforest Association certified or that it's fair trade certified. So look at the label and empower yourself that way. And actually, one of my favorite routes to go is to really go to the local chocolatiers that are springing up all around the country, because so many of them have a very direct relationship with the people who are growing the chocolate. And the fewer links in the supply chain, the more accountability there is, and the fewer people who are trying to make a buck off the chain. And they're really working with the farmers directly to get them the best price possible. And they're really going to be happy to work with you to develop a taste for this kind of chocolate.
And Kat, that's great. I mean, I've got a chocolate place in my own neighborhood that just sprung up, so I know this is pretty popular. Do we have a sense of whether or not this chocolate is like the kind of chocolate we grew up with, and if it's more or less expensive?
You know, it may not be exactly like the chocolate you grew up with, but as Kristen Hart from Peak Atlanta likes to say, one taste and you get it, maybe two tastes. So it might not have quite the butterfat content in it that you're used to, or actually, sorry, the cocoa fat content, but we challenged our reporters to come up with recipes that would make people really just sense what was wonderful about this chocolate. We got everything from sourdough chocolate recipes to chocolate soup to chocolate cookies. And people really put their heart and soul into emphasizing what is beautiful about this chocolate. So what you're really looking for is chocolate that is of great quality, but also makes a difference in the quality of people's lives.
That's great. Well, that's a delicious combination there. Thank you, Kat. Appreciate it.
All right, so, God, I hate that commercial. It's pretty commercial. So a small, we could utilitarians, if you use act utilitarianism, a small number of people are enslaved in the cocoa fields to make this stuff that makes a lot of us happy. And it doesn't take a whole lot of people to harvest cocoa to make chocolate for the entire world. Well, that just is creepy. And so rule utilitarianism comes up and says, look, we've got to come up with rules that in the aggregate, maybe in this instance, but if we allowed slavery to go on, it just doesn't work well, right? To do that. You're not creating overall happiness. And so you get act and rule utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism tries to deal with that. Now, again, some of the problems with this are, how do you determine what's the greatest happiness? How do you do the calculus on that? It's really hard. If we went back in time, for example, to the time when Henry Ford invented the automobile, what are we facing now in this world as a result of, largely as a result of the automobile? We're facing massive cataclysmic climate change because of the stuff that we pollute into the, and it's largely as a result of cars driving around and airplanes. Would anybody call Henry Ford, who couldn't have foreseen the events that would lead to, we now have far more people suffering from asthma, even if you don't believe in climate change, which, by the way, if you don't believe in climate change, if you do not believe, there is, let me explain this to you people, there is no credible climate scientist who denies climate change. The popular press denies it, or they say there's a debate because they find wackos out there who have PhDs, but not in climate. There is no referee jury article in a scholarly journal in climate science that denies this. None. But even if you don't believe in climate change, we do know that automobiles and the pollution that they put off are affecting our, even if you don't believe in the climate change aspect of it. More students today, more children today have asthma as a percentage than ever before. More children are having cardiac problems as a result of breathing in the impurities in our air, in our dirtiest cities. That children did not die of heart attacks 50 years ago, folks. They do now, as a result of two things: overeating and polluted atmosphere, right? I mean, we know this. Would you call Henry Ford a bad man? Because maybe we're not as happy He couldn't have foreseen that. There's a foreseeability aspect to it. So duty ethics, on the other hand, say that we shouldn't worry about the ends. We should just figure out what the duties are. Again, this takes two types. There's religious absolutism. If we're going to use religious absolutism, where are we going to go? Well, we're going to go to the book. Now, the problem with this is whose book are we going to use if we go to the book? Well, in the United States, we probably use the what? We're going to go to the book. What are we going to use? We're using a religious text. The Bible. Well, which one should we use? The Catholic Bible or the King James Version, which is the Protestant Bible? Or the New International Version, which attempts to take out all of the fancy language in the Bible and strip it down? Which one? Problems there, right? So Kant comes up with something else called the categorical imperative. Kant says you can discern your duties a priori through the rational mind. How do you do this? Well, you have to be able to will that your action would be a universal maxim of law. It has to be logically consistent, universally applicable, and based on pure reason. Now, what is that? Well, you can't start reciting the categorical imperative. We've seen some of the problems with utilitarianism, right? There are some creepy aspects to it. In theory, you could say we're going to enslave a few people over here and get a big result, and that would be justifiable. But then we come up with a rule utilitarian which says, no, we're not going to do that because that's creepy. Because if we started doing that in the aggregate, we start saying, well, we're going to enslave a few people for this and a few people for that. That becomes, well, then it becomes creepy, right? And you might not end up with the best results because you're saying, well, it's okay for chocolate. Well, what about for textile manufacturing? We all need cheaper clothes. We could enslave a few people over here to make all of our clothes, and wouldn't we all be happier? We get cheaper clothes. And you see how that sort of ball would build, right? And then we have the foreseeability problem, even with rule utilitarianism. So Kant says, well, you can't rely on that. Now, what's wrong with this? You can't start to recite the categorical imperative and have a glass of wine and not sort of begin to laugh, because what would be logically consistent, absolutely pure reason, universally applicable? Well, Kant says that in every other interaction with another human being, another rational being, you have to treat that being as an end in and of themselves and never as a means to an end. What does that mean? Never lie. Never lie. You can never lie. Why not? Because when you lie, you are manipulating somebody for your own purpose. You're not allowing them to make their own autonomous decisions. Never lie. It may be the reason I'm divorced, because I sort of took this to heart. Never lie. How do I look in this dress? You look like death warmed over, Robin, in pastels. I've told you that 1,000 times. Go upstairs and change. Brutal honesty. I say things like that. Brutally honest. Never lie. How about a hard one? Ochrana is at the door. And you know that if you don't lie to them, they're going to find the political dissidents. Where are those, enemies of the state, as Donald Trump calls them? So we can round them up and put them in concentration camps. Never lie. Most of us would say that's too harsh. Well, we recognize that, and I think the reason that Kant would say that you can never lie is because if everybody started lying, and there's a movie about this, by the way, with Ricky Gervais called The Invention of Lying. He's the first person to lie. Everybody's brutally honest in this world. I love it. They were just like me. he goes on a date and her mother calls and says, "Where are you going to sleep with him?" And she says, "Oh, probably not. He's kind of fat and dumpy." And he's like sitting right there in front of me, right? So it was brutally honest. But then he starts lying, and then everybody starts lying, and it turns into really bad results. So I think if you ask Kant why he couldn't lie, well, because ultimately it would lead to bad results. So isn't that sort of a backdoor way of saying that results maybe do sort of matter? But it's something that we should think about. Because again, we can apply this universally, never lie. Doesn't allow me to lie, doesn't allow you to lie, doesn't allow our society to lie. It's universally applicable, it's based on reason, and it's non-emotive. So there are no exceptions. It may ultimately be based on premises, may be based on results, and so that's a problem. There's a third, which is virtue ethics, and it's one that I really think that we should consider in business. It's based on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. This is named after his son Nicodemus, and the Eudemian Ethics is named after one of his chroniclers who compiled it. Most scholars think that the Eudemian Ethics is the first book, and the Nicomachean Ethics comes after. Sir Anthony Kenny of Oxford doesn't believe that. He thinks the Eudemian Ethics is actually the more full and complete work, and I would certainly hate to argue with Anthony Kenny on anything regarding Aristotle. But what we see in Aristotle is we see a balancing. We see this in Aristotle's The Politics. Aristotle says, and politics is important because as marketers we have to deal with governments. He says there are three types of governments. There are governments of one, a few, and many. Unlike Socrates, who comes up with an ideal form of government, he divides them into two categories, good and bad governments. Socrates says there's one ideal form of government. Aristotle says, I want to make sure I can see the board in the video. Aristotle says there's not one ideal form of government. You can have different governments for different places, but they're either good or bad, depending on whether or not they govern in the interest of the governed or whether or not they govern in the interest of themselves. A good government of one he calls a monarchy. A bad government of one, a tyranny. A good government of a few he calls an aristocracy. A bad government of a few he calls an oligarchy. A good government of many he calls a polity, and the worst government of all, which is mob rule, is democracy. Just hordes of people running around, off with their head. The will of the masses. He really likes this one. This is the middle ground. And why does he really like this one? Well, because it's the least likely to degenerate into the other types. If you have one person in charge, it's very easy. There's an old saying that says power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's very easy to degenerate into that bad kind of form of government. If you have too many people, it's easy for one person to start swaying the crowd and lead them. Have you ever been in a stadium? Have you ever been in a hockey match? I used to love it. We used to have the most violent league in the hockey in the NHL. The Central Hockey League at one point in time was the most fighting league, and we had the first hockey team that we had was called the Oklahoma City Blazers. And have you ever been to a hockey game? It's great. It's like the Roman Colosseum. People are up, face off, rip, and there's expletives shouting and there's blood on the ice. That's crowd mentality. It's easy to degenerate into that. But if you have a few, each one is going to check the others, but it doesn't descend into chaos. Aristotle says this along with friendship, and this is something that marketers can really use. He says there are three types of friendship. Aristotle's not priggish. There are three types of friendships. There's friendship grounded on utility. These are your work friends. How many of you have had a job? How many of you have left a job? Did you stay friends with everybody that you were with at that first job that you had? No. Why? Because you got a new job. They're no longer useful. There's friendship that's grounded in pleasure. These are your drinking buddies. And if you drink too much, they send you to whiskey school. And at whiskey school, they're going to tell you things like you have to change your playgrounds and your playmates. I've never been to whiskey school, but I know that. I'm a lawyer. Lawyers like to drink. Lots of my colleagues have had too much to drink. They have to go to whiskey school. And at whiskey school, they teach them at the Betty. You got to change your playgrounds here. You can't go to the bar anymore, right? Then there's perfected friendship, where A befriends B because he wants what's best for B, not because they get something useful out of it, not because they have fun, as in drink up, let's have another round, but because he wants what's best. These are the friendships of a lifetime. Now, as businesses, I think we can learn from this. Utility is what we mostly have in business. And in relationship building, that's what we're going to focus on. But Aristotle says this is the ideal friendship. You're both useful and pleasurable, but you want what's best for the other person for their own sake. It's this middle ground. So he comes up with a list of virtues. What's an extreme defect of character? The coward. What's the opposite of the coward? The heedless person. What's the middle ground? Courage. The courageous person doesn't fight every battle. You have to pick your battles. You can't win every one. But it's this balance. Sincerity. What is sincerity? Is the sincere person always brutally honest, like me? You look like utter hell. Go change. I will not be seen with you in that dress. And the, oh, you look amazing. What's the sincere person? What's the one, I mean, it's not just about brutal honesty. So for Aristotle, it's about living your life. It's through habituation, through developing these virtues. Now, one of the criticisms is that what is it that we can, how are we going to come up with these virtues? I think Aristotle has a pretty good formula for that. He says the way you come up with the virtues is you have to determine what the purpose of a human being is. You have to arrive at the terminus ad quem. What is the terminus ad quem? The terminus ad quem is the point at which it no longer makes sense to ask why. I was a why child. Why that? So you see me on the sidewalk and you say, what are you doing? I say, I'm going to the doctor. Well, why? Because I have to have a physical. Well, why? Well, because, I need to know what I need to do to maintain my good health. Well, why? Well, because I want to live. Now there we have it. That's the terminus ad quem. It no longer makes sense to say, well, why? Why do you want to live? I've just told you in Candide, the old woman says, I went on loving life. Even in the most abhorrent of conditions, I went on loving life and clinging to it. I want to live. That's the terminus ad quem. What is the terminus ad quem of a human being for Aristotle? Well, he says it's the eudaimonic life. In ancient Greek, okay. How do we translate that? Most people translate it as happiness, but I don't think it's happiness as in drink up, let's have another round, sir. Or Professor Daniel Robinson, also at Oxford, says that eudaimonia means the flourishing life. The flourishing life. It's this balance life. A lot of people say, well, that may not be the end of a human being. I think it's a pretty good thing. Then they say, well, even if we can agree on that, can we teach it? Well, there's at least one example of that. Benjamin Franklin. One of our favorite founding fathers. He's maybe most of our favorite founding fathers because he's the only one we actually know by his nickname, Ben Franklin. You don't say Georgie Washington or Tom Jefferson. But we know him by his nickname, Ben. Started from very humble beginnings. His father was a tradesman, a renderer, made candles, soaps, and things like that. It's a messy business. Didn't have a lot of money. Grew up to become one of America's most beloved statesmen, politicians, inventors. He invented all kinds of things. Bifocals were invented by Ben Franklin. The Franklin stove, the lightning rod were all invented by him. he started out as a young man, noticing that he had certain leadership qualities, but that he was likely to get boys into scrapes. They came upon a building site when he was young, and there were a pile of rocks across from a river that were intended to build a house. And he and his friends decided, well, that would just make a much better wharf where they could go out and fish. So he conned his friends into doing it. They got caught. His father, of course, came along and said, nothing is worthy that is not paid for, and is not useful, that has not been earned. Franklin took that to heart, and he thought about reforming himself. He worked on it every day. He came up with a list of 13 virtues based on this analysis of means between extremes. And he rose to great prominence. He became a very successful businessman, a wealthy person, a fantastic scientist. He did all kinds of experiments, not just with electricity, but on ocean currents and the things that move our Earth, measuring the temperatures at various depths, lightning, electricity, I mean, all of these things. So he put them down on a little thing, and he had what were called spots. He knew there was more work to do. Why did he come up with 13? Well, you can get through, if you multiply 13 by 4, you come up with what? What's 13 by 4? Somebody tell me. You come tripping off your tongue. It's not difficult. It's 52. How many weeks are there in a year? 52. So you can get through 4 complete cycles in a year. It's the reason that sitcoms historically have had 13 episodes. You could have a fall lineup, a spring lineup, and then you could have 2 series of reruns during the summer. They don't do that anymore. Seasons are not seasons. They just sort of start whenever and end whenever. When I was a kid growing up, they actually had these set dates. But these are the ones that he says, these are the balance. You know, I love these. Justice, wrong none by doing injuries, and omit the benefits that are your duty. Industry, lose no time, always be employed in something useful, cut off all unnecessary actions. Frugality, make no expense. I love, let's see, the chastity, rarely use venery. This is an old-fashioned word for sex. Rarely use venery, but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or to the injury of yours or another's peace or reputation. He really was remarkable. It was his own little psychological experiment, and it worked. So I think it's something that we should seriously consider. All right, any questions on ethics? So I don't have time to play the video on research and ethics, but we will play that next time, or we'll play it after the text. So the next time we will have the exam, and then on Tuesday we'll move into research, and hopefully I can try and get us caught up. So we will be behind, but we will not have, research will not be part of the first exam, so that will be moved on to the second exam. All right? For those of you who want to study again, you can find those sample exams on T2L. You may have to go down and load more into the modules. I passed a roll sheet if you didn't sign it, because came in late, sure, and sign that. That's okay. You can always- Yeah, we gotta bring it. Thursday. It's everything except the research that I have on the syllabus. It's 1, 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't include 8.